Muy bien.
Okay, without further ado, we will now speak about the wildland-urban interface. As put by Jorge, it is something that we've suffered since the origins of wildfires in Spain, since we started to have houses. Funnily enough, the first houses were in the rural areas, in towns, spread around the forest, but also if we going back through these talks and if we speak to the elderly people, we would see that there were protection routines, as mentioned in the Facebook forum, and in some places in Spain, Asturias, for example, they had the cesta ferias, where the whole town would gather to clean the plots and common areas when there was undergrowth in order to keep the town clean and free from fire. And also they had croplands that were burned to widen the spaces and to prevent fire from getting to the houses. You realize that this problem reaches very far back, but there were acquired routines to self-protect, and we've lost that. We've lost this feeling of living in a landscape. It could be due to urban development, when we don't have a town but a development, and maybe because population is not linked to the landscape anymore. They do not self-protect anymore. Why is it important to self-protect? We suffered it in Valencia. Raúl will speak about it. And we cannot just expect a fire truck behind every house to protect it, as it would happen in the city. We need a certain degree of protection and integration with the landscape. This does not happen with what we are seeing right now. We are focusing on response, on the firefighting team response when the fire knocks on our door. If it was just one or two houses, we could, but currently we are seeing huge wildfires affecting hundreds or thousands of houses at the same time. And then we cannot have a proper response, and therefore there's a huge mismatch between the situation and our response. We cannot also think that all public resources are focused to protecting private property in such a direct and uneven manner. So in the light of recent developments, especially in Israel, it seems that the words terrorism and fires are starting to be linked. It is difficult to digest, but this is a very powerful destruction tool. So now we are entering a new level. We are talking about homeland security. So we are facing changing and more complex scenarios. So in this sense, we submitted a proposal to the European Commission, to the DG for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid, in order to create an exchange point on the WUI issues regarding the human factor, prevention and operation and reaction. These aspects are issues in themselves, separate issues. And also, we suggested to create this forum, which is WITWatch, Wildland Urban Interface Watch. And now you're all part of this forum. The idea with WITWatch is to create and promote a European interest network or concerned network, which is gaining momentum every year because the operation campaign is longer and longer. Then identify stakeholders. We are talking about owners, urban developers, administrations, research centers. It is a myriad of participants, and then we need to capitalize on experience. We see the complexity of the fires, we organize protocols, we react to such complexity, and then we take it back home. But we don't pass it on. Maybe we mention it to colleagues, but there is not a conveyor belt for other generations. So we've tried to capture these lessons learned. You will be sharing these with us so that future generations can learn more in the future and can react and have a more adequate response to fires. So we've created also a discussion forum. Obviously, we cannot have everyone in this room, but we like to have this meeting as a starting point. And we've used so far Twitter and Facebook, but we have a specific forum for this, which is WeWatch. And I would like to invite you to participate because the discussion doesn't end here. The discussion starts here. So we'll be also publishing a white book on prevention and management of the human factor, also risk mapping, which will be available at the end of the year. And this will be available in our lessons learned datebook. And in my presentation, you will see our proposal regarding prevention and the relationship between prevention and management. So we would like to improve self-protection when there are wildfires in interface areas. To do so, we've organized a consortium. We have our colleagues here. This is us, Meteogrid, which is a small company, but very dynamic. We work with weather forecasting, climate change, and we provide added value to product and service related to the climate. And we work especially with wildfires, and we've been working on this for the last 10 years. We also work with the Center for Studies on Wildfires, ADAI, from the Coimbra University, and they have given us scientific support. And they also have a laboratory, and also we have the help of the Pau Costa Foundation. And if you work with wildfires, you know how powerful they are, how much momentum they are gaining. And truth be told, their help is incredibly useful. And then we also have one of the best teams for risk mapping in Europe, which is the VICNet from the Sassari University. We have Constantino Circa and Sansono Surna. They might be there somewhere. Hi. They work for many years to fine-tuning risk mappings. And lastly, we have our dear old friend from CERN, a research center, which have an operational side and a research side. This is Entente pour la Forêt. They contribute with knowledge in safety and equipment for wildland urban interfaces. So these are the 6 interface areas we work on so that we can focus. I started in 1999, and now is no longer the main focus. Then we have analysis and risk mapping, preventive planning, operations. We have an important representation of this point, human factor, research and technological development. And these are the tools that we have developed. We have a very powerful database on lessons learned that we are now populating with all data. And then we have a library on WUIs with more than 400 publications, the debate forum. We also have a media repository for videos, pictures, which are geo-referenced and related to wildfire events. And then we have a main actors database, and then we have a risk assessment tool. Lastly, we've created a municipal plan subnetwork called MINCE, where you can upload your emergency plans, in order to plan or just to check it. And gradually you will have all data uploaded on this platform. We've already held 3 workshops, such as this one. Workshop, you know what it means in English. It's a work meeting. First, we have the one in Italy with our Sassari colleagues. Then we have the big one in Portugal about home vulnerability. The last one took place in France, and it was on human factor. We had plenty of European countries, and now we have this one. So this is just to give you a perspective of this workshop. Probably this is the biggest one regarding assistance, audience, because for me, interface issues is not a mature issue yet. We are working on several fronts, but I've seen that is still uncharted territory. I will try to summarize some aspects, and I am afraid of some of these because you learn and you hear things here and there, and this is what I would like, or we would like, to convey to the audience so that you can participate with your own experience. As said before, we have been able to work with the Coimbra University Research Center. We've done some trials, and Mario and his team are working from issues. For example, is it good to pull down a Persian blind? So we run a test, and then we see how much it is affected and how much it is protecting us. And then we have all these tools on the website. And I would like to invite you to visit the WeWatch forum so that you can participate and you can add these to the database. We also have a YouTube channel which is broadcasting right now. This will be recorded so that we have also international audience. We have also uploaded videos on trials, on workshops and other ideas. And most interesting is this section, the lessons learned database. We give information pills on specific issues happening in different fires. And even though these are repeated 20 times, we will learn these lessons. And then we will see lessons being repeated. Okay, I see a house. It has suffered, the windows have been affected. Should I throw cold water at them? If you do, they would crack and break. Well, this is a lesson learned. I have material next to a house with a small roof. Should I go into there? How much heat is being created there? Well, maybe if I go in there, I may be exposed. So this is another lesson learned. And lessons learned come with text and images. So you can check it out and reach your own conclusions. And finally, we try to be very active on social media. In fact, some people I just met on social media, and it is great to exchange information on a daily basis. So after this introduction, so that you have a framework of what we are doing, I would like to focus on prevention regarding operation. As a preventive planner, what can I offer to the operational team so that when you are on the field, you have opportunities, access, protection, water, evacuations, and so on and so forth. I want lock, stock, and the whole thing. I want lock, stock, and barrel. But when it comes to reality, it might not be practical for environmental, social, or economic reasons. So, recent lessons learned. I will focus on prevention, territory transformation, and what it entails regarding emergency management. To do so, I will use some examples. I won't delve into detail because we will have more, we'll have specialists later on, but I will touch upon some repeating issues. So I will mention the Carcaixent fire, Funchal fire in Portugal, Benitaché, Alicante, and Rognac in France, in Marseille. I will just touch upon some prevention issues. You know how stubborn I am, and I keep repeating certain things. And one of my favorite topics is scales. So we've seen different topics regarding interface. We have classified several topics, and now we would like to classify in 3 different scales what we do. First, landscape, organization, and homes and developments. We have macro scale, mesoscale, and micro scale. This is nothing new. I am just putting terms to existing issues. And you can see this on the presentation. And for example, mesoscale, we are widening the concept. This helps us to pigeonhole each issue we are facing, and also it helps us finding those responsible and how these responsible people can interact with each other so that we can implement efficient measures to have a opportunity, a chance when we are firefighting. So we analyze fires, and then we observe strategic points, peaks, the areas where we can tackle the fire. And when we speak about mesoscale, we are speaking about urban development, residential development. We only have the perimeter strip, and this is insufficient. But also, sometimes it becomes a trap. And microscale is when we speak about owners, houses, fuel that we have around the house. So I would like to turn things around. From the prevention perspective, I would turn things around due to atomization. At macro scale, we have excellent analysts in the audience. We have Carlos Ruiz regarding landscape, but micro scale is highly itemized, and there are many problems. We need to take into account that wildfires do not spread only on the surface. They come through wind, smoke, and firebrands. This makes it very difficult. So we've also spoken about uncertainty, and it's the fact that houses are there on the forest. In the case of interface has to be the opportunity. I cannot move the residential development to a safe place. And furthermore, when fire reaches an interface, in a small fire, interface is the focus, but in a big fire, a fire front would distort the emergency and forces me to go there. Whatever the fire evolution, to bring media over there, it means that the fire will spread in other directions. And the most recent example is the one in Rognac. It was a very strong fire from the right and impacting vitrols, and the head goes to the other side, and then I focus on the right front and the fire goes away on the other side. So these scenarios need to be self-defensive. We need to turn around the tables. Otherwise, everything will be focused on protecting the homes of the owners. So this is an image we work on usually, looking for opportunity points. This is a real challenge for me on interface. territory transformation. And lastly, we have the environment. Some lessons learned at macro scale. One I've mentioned already. Why quick fires will condition my operation and the fire spread. I have so many examples that where is a quick fire starting and then we are focusing on the head. We've learned from other conferences and other speakers that we need to sectorize the interface areas. We need to focus on one area, but we shouldn't forget about the rest, about the other areas. And also something we've learned, that interface is not just a friction area. It is what we bring from first studies with the Americans, territorial studies from 2005-2006, where thus vegetation touches the homes. This is funchal fire. We have friction, fire impact. Area 2, we have smoke and firebrands, but also we have fires. Area 3, which is a new area, this is an urban area. So, okay, we say evacuate, we have smokes and the windows are closed or not. Result, we have firebrands and destroyed houses. So the YUI concept goes much beyond this point. We could speak about a mile radius. So this influence area should be prepared for this firebrand rain, for this smoke, otherwise we will have absolute disaster. An interesting point that we have seen in different areas, such as the Canary Islands or Valparaiso, is the rib effect. We have our geographer, Emilio de Diego, who drafts all these analyses. And this goes to show that when we have a residential development in Funchal, the rib effect is that we have a ravine to each side, and on top I can still develop. But what are you doing if you keep developing? If you have firebrands, then fire will reposition, and then you will have total disaster. We saw the same at Valparaiso. So be careful when we are developing on ravines. As far as I know, there was a political party in power for many years. In my personal perspective is that some rules were ignored for years, and eventually we had created a huge monster. And this is urban development on areas which are not very suitable for developing. And then let's have a look at the ravine. For me, the most exciting thing is mesoscale. It is difficult, and therefore it is the most interesting thing. And I wish we could see urban developments with the right mesoscale. France is getting there, gradually getting there. At the Rognac wildfire, I saw the French model I like so much, because you see this structure which is not an antagonist to water planning or to slopes or these houses that are on slopes. You cannot cut down the trees there. It's more detrimental than positive. So we try to reduce the fuel load in these cases. So we've learned that we have at least 3 barriers. The interior mesoscale, which is the tissue created by vacant plants and hedges. Perimeter mesoscale, which is the one we work with usually, which is the protection strip. But this strip could be a trap. And then we have the exterior mesoscale, the defensible area. That means to bring down the fire and bring it down to a reasonable intensity. So we have an intervention area towards the houses, but with our backs being covered. So now we will see some interesting points about interior mesoscale. I think that plots and common areas, ravines, hedges, and communication and fuel accumulation. There's an interesting issue here. When I speak about fuel load on interface areas, I cannot establish a parallel with a forest interface. In forest areas, I have dead fuel loads and active fuel loads. And they interact with different aspects, species, rainfall, flow, and so on and so forth. But on an interface area, I could control two important aspects. First, define fuel load, and then water of the active fuel load. We're talking about that fuel load and water. And why? Because I can't think of taking out things, but adequating, adapting things. So we would provide more water to the existing plants. I can condition and I can modify and adapt plant water, which is something I cannot do at forest level. Okay, things we've seen so far. Benitachel fire, vacant plots. Vacant plots is a place where I have crowns, and then I have undergrowth, a huge fine fuel load, and other. We have also waste and other objects. Okay, just in these areas, let's speak about the fuel load. How many kilowatts per square meter? I could know, but here we have objects, waste, and I haven't the faintest idea. And these volumes could be huge. So we could speak about forest load, gardens, plus objects being added or adding a huge degree of heat. So we always need to think what's the fire load. So if you add to this that we have ravines, on top of the fire load, we have the topography. So we are creating huge disasters. Examples. We've seen this is the aftermath. There was a huge crown combustion. The huge fuel was used here, and I was walking around, and it was up to knee high. And you can see this from the Google Earth pictures. So we were creating important fire loads at local level, which were sufficient to spread on hedges and to propagate fire in a diffuse manner. Raúl will speak about it later. So first difficult issue, vacant plots with all kinds of loads. And with these fire loads, the ways and roads are insufficient. How do we activate this with firebrands? Everything is prepared to prepare the diffuse spread, to spread this on hedges. And you know me very well. I've been working on this from 1999, and I always say, look at the hedges, because I think in 2001, 2002, this was creating a problem. So I become obsessed with hedges. Not all hedges burn the same way, but they are transformed structures, especially with pruning. Pruning hedges means creating geometric structures with a load inside. But I'm trying to get rid of the dead fuel load, and here I am accumulated by closing light, by pruning. And this is an issue being repeated everywhere. Everything would burn down. So what's the idea? We are linking vacant plants to cypress trees. And that's how I create diffuse spread. So we need to be very, very well aware of the fuel load, where is it and why. So now I will skip to the Rognac fire to show you that by law they need to clean 50 meters around the house. They are huge plots. So when they have this huge clean area around the house, like a donut. Oh, this is working. That's great. Thank you, Marco. You are great. Rognac fire. This is the head towards the end, a Marignon. Here we see that every plot has been cleared mostly. And this looks like pasture land, so I have shadow, I have no load. That's great, but what happens? Fire goes through, but with a lower degree of intensity. So I'm bringing down fire here. If there is wind, it could go through the crowns, but otherwise it would stay low. So this mesoscale example of this tissue created based on these huge donuts, so to say, is a very interesting point. As usually, it is the French who are paving the way. We are good at interface fires, but they are leading the way, and they implement new legislation because they are forced to, with huge fines. And then we could say, yes, we can. And then we see when there's diffuse fire with low fuel load, we have controlled fire. This could clean the area. And also interesting, it is when we speak about garden water, this becomes an important issue. If the fire is strong, it will end with the garden anyway. But if we reduce the load and we water gardens with drip irrigation, for example, it would be kept green, low intensity, and then we would give a chance for self-protection. And for me, this is the idea we should focus on. When I started, I thought I would clean everything around the house, but this is not acceptable. Sorry, I'm a bit bad at new technologies. Okay. And here we have an example. Medium intensity fire, and this person had 1 hour for irrigation, but he would systematically water his plot because he was sensitized regarding fires. And then he created a kind of island which gave a opportunity to his house, and in fact nothing happened to his house. And then we see hedges again. They reached to a house and they destroyed the house. So everything I manage here locally is useless. I have again what I'm trying to avoid. Inflammable species, loads. I cannot when it's dead, I cannot adapt it, but when it's alive, I can influence it by watering it. And then we see how you have hydrologic issues here. We see an important raving on a water evacuation way, and suddenly it's impossible to help here because we have here potential for landslide. We should think about fire protection, but also hydrological risks. And then we've tried to change this scale, but it should be in a coordinated and complete way. Otherwise, we're just wasting our money. And this is a picture from Coiserola. For me, a very complex area which should be studied thoroughly with a very complex interface. We worked on this area. Here we had a chance, an opportunity here, but it's just a single point. And I don't know to which degree we are protecting houses where behind this you have fuel load. Therefore, this should be a common effort. We saw the French examples where owners would create their own spaces and altogether they create a pattern. This is the point I want to get to. Atomizing responsibilities so that we have a defensible area for everyone. And now we are reaching one of the main conclusions. With a community feeling, it doesn't matter how much I am planning because I won't be able to obtain any results. I need that people understand that they are defending and protecting each other. And this is what happens at Sextaferias. Here is just the opposite. We have individuals here. So first we need to change this concept. Everyone is protecting each other. Unlike we've seen in Benitachay, where owners would clean their vicinities, but they were surrounded by other owners who would have huge hedges, and those hedges were destructing their homes. So we need to integrate owners into prevention, create dialogue spaces. It's easier and more sustainable, and also it is quicker. So we try to do this at Meteogrid in Madrid with some residential development and Peñas Calles. And we had huge ravines, gullies, which were turned into walking routes. And we created dialogue spaces so that the owner gains awareness of the fact that they are living in the forest. And this is great, but it is also a responsibility. So now we will tackle a difficult point, difficult to be conveyed. We have the perimeter mesoscale. We've created this tissue, and here we have a perimeter. Perimeter is another kettle of fish. Why? Because you are near the forest, so this requires for more effort, and this is the first barrier. You should avoid inflammable hedges, better irrigation, avoid hedges. Inflammable objects are more important here, and so on and so forth. So what do we have? Completely the opposite. Perimeter plots are in the vicinity of forest and they are not taken after. Gardens spread, and then they have a bigger degree of fuel load. You could create the strip, but then the neighbors could drop the waste on the other side. So for me, the fuel load and the perimeter, when I speak about perimeter, the perimeter is around here, but this ravine is creating a different interface here. So we need to create it if there is no strip here. When we have many strips, do we create a perimeter between each other? We could speak about pasture land with a lower degree of fuel load, and it is here on these ravines when we have neglected hedges, and this is happening exactly where I don't want it to happen. This is the friction area, and this is conditioning our response. Some example of our perimeter strip helping to load the interior. But here in this picture I cannot do any kind of work, because if this is burning, fire goes through and there's only one way out, and this is conditioning absolutely our response, because this is an old residential development with older people, with old vegetation, and this is a huge challenge. Small things that we've learned at perimeter mesoscale: Benitache fire, separation of plots and houses. This one didn't have anything. It just had a platform and a swimming pool, and it was helping us to protect the houses. This is important. The intermix, how we distribute all the components. And in this perimeter, there were no burnt down houses. And then we see the separation of elements with swimming pools. This is helpful for us. And lastly, the perimeter strip. Yesterday I was talking to Elsa Pastor about how a strip being created by us doesn't grow when vegetation grows. I keep clearing it away, but here in the forest in Segovia we have a self-protection plan with a very nice strip, very wide strip. It's a very forestry area, but it doesn't grow with the vegetation. It's not dynamic. It doesn't grow. I need more. My back could be burning, so I could transform this. And now we are referring to the exterior mesoscale. So the perimeter strip should be widened in order to transform this into structures which are reasonable from the ecological point of view. And also regarding fire prevention, we are talking about areas such as maybe meadows, pasture land, but this is fine on paper. But when we try to turn this into reality, this is very difficult. This is a real technical need, but it's not linked to our administration scheme. There is no specific measure for this, and then the person being affected would scream at us, but there is nothing we can do. These are huge transformation, and this strip, the perimeter strip, can be more than just a box where we open air for the fire. It could be a trap rather than a help. Another example is to widen the strip, to bring the forest to meadows, to pasture land, in order to give opportunities to firefighters, so they can have huge margins of security. And this way they could have water and they could reduce fires to extinction levels. Otherwise, we are in a trap. Especially when we speak about perimeter ways, perimeter streets, giving access and support to any operation. These distributed houses do not have such structure, and they are conditioning us even more. I would forbid this. This means widening the total friction longitude and forcing us to intervene in a more radical manner. And then we have structures. Fernando Almau will speak about some supporting structures which should reinforce and give a chance to our operation in case of fire, and to give a water point to help the other operatives on the field and the planes. If there is no transformation here, there's no point in having water access or support. And exterior mesoscale has no management, and then we have the fire paradox. In the vicinity of houses, we insist on prevention. Guy Lindbergh in Tennessee had spoke about this, about fuel, and this was the case. We saw this in Tennessee. There was 80-year fuel accumulation, and then when fire came, fire ended with everything, burnt everything down. So we need some other structures to give a chance to preventing fire. And then exterior mesoscale, we are referring to hundreds of meters of perimeter strip. This is the amount of land we need to transform. This is very costly, very difficult, but we have the tools to measure the intensity of mesoscale transformation. And we would be based on the radiation we could get in a intervention in houses. For example, if we are working with houses, your back should be covered near the houses, and therefore the garden is your first issue of concern, and the effect that one garden will have on the ways and on other gardens. So we need to work on this garden, for example, and if it's burning, we have a local problem. So mesoscale goes beyond house protection and also protecting ways and roads. So we need to see what's the vegetation to make sure that on these roads fire is reasonable, so to say, and I can tackle this fire. And again, we see that this is focusing on the interior of residential development, because fire could spread through wind, through firebrands. So this is requiring for a transformation of interior mesoscale. This is telling me start with the houses, with the gardens, and then move away. Because if you start with a strip, that's fine, but firebrand will create 150 emergencies within the self residential development. So this is Collserola, Ses Planes, Catalonia, north of Spain. This is the transformation around houses and streets and roads. But we are talking about a 150 to 100 meter perimeter. I want to reduce the fire to extinction level, and that's my idea, that's my goal. But this is incredibly difficult. You need to talk to municipalities, to owners of all kinds. And to conclude, we will speak about microscale. For me, this is the starting point, the most efficient starting point to start with the transformation, to speak with the owners, to transform the vacant plots, the gardens. If we start with the strip, I would start here. These are awareness campaigns, and we create structures. This is the scheme we are using at Whitwatch, and Elsa Pastor is working really hard on this and using all her experience on this and using it for this reality, which is the reality affecting houses. Why I would like to defend houses, so that they are a shelter or because they can be helpful for us. It could have different reasons and different effects. So I would like to highlight the fuel load in the vicinity of the house. And it is not necessarily the forest load, it is the load coming from objects burning down around the house. So immediate radiation has to do with hedges and gardens, and then we have forest objects radiation. So we could start as close as possible from the facade, from the front of the house, the Persian blinds, the terraces, the rooftops, objects by the house. If my concern is protecting the houses, or protecting here at this point in case of wildfire, what do we see? That we have exactly the opposite. We are surrounded by fire loads, hedges, objects, everything that you could imagine. And the fire might be a kilometer away and is getting here through firebrands. Firebrands have a huge load of fire, of dead fire and dead fuel load, and is burning down everything, especially cypress trees. And there is no way to stop this, and is creating destruction and very important fire load around the house. This is a very important example at Pinosol. Talking to the owner, he said, "This hedge is not mine, these other guys. It started to burn, and then it burned down my whole garage. And it's not my property, so who is responsible for this? The other neighbor or this owner?" So again, we speak about the importance of community. What did I receive after talking for 3 days to the owners? Just complaints. "Look, this guy is not cleaning, I'm going to report him to the police and this and that." But look, why don't you talk to them and reach an agreement? And some other hedges do not burn or do not spread. We have, for example, privets, bushes, bog. This would allow for the wind to go through, and it's all green. It burns, but it doesn't spread. Yes, this broke the hedge, but it didn't spread around the house. And then there are other possibilities. We see examples of self-protection, irrigation systems in Funchal, how people prepare for fires, but you have this neighbor next to this other house. This is Rognac. And then this owner has all kind of fire loads next to someone who took the time to protect their house. So who is the owner of the risk? Funchal. This owner decided to protect his house, so he had hoses, he had water pumps. And the counter example are the burned down houses at micro scale. This is a pastureland area. There are no trees, just pastureland. And there's plenty, but there is plenty of very tall cypress trees. And then there is a single point of contact. And then this was a very expensive operation, but this went down. And then we have this container here. There was direct contact. There was nothing. He was just the only thing you can do is use the chainsaw, and then if fire doesn't spread, he will complain because you cut down the cypress tree. But when you show them this picture, he will say, "Please cut everything down. If we could go to the future and back," he would beg us to cut every single cypress tree down. And then we have rooftops with little access. So what I mean is that the fire load around a house, it doesn't need to be of a forest kind. The owner is the main manager. We have thousands of owners, but not thousands of firefighters. More examples. This picture made the headlines. There wasn't such a big fire load, forest load, but there was plenty. There were plenty of objects, and you can see how many calories were burnt here. So what's the perception from the owner? Well, yes, the fire was behind, but the main reason was the fire load. So who is the risk owner? What can we do there? Just having three people throwing water at it just to save the house? Does it make sense? That's the point I want to get to. These are the lessons learned. Well, we have a fuel discharge. It wasn't that powerful. We have all kinds of waste, cans in the vicinity of the house. This is also Benitachay, Alicante, Carcaixent in Valencia. And then we see that the structure of the house protected the house. And also the water canyons, again, Benitachay. I will skip these ones. Strangely enough, this is Rognac, which is cypress trees, a distant area. The fire got here because there was a LGP deposit, And then we see Funchal, which you can do nothing because there were eucalypt trees. And then there were rooftops. And this is the result. Millions of objects, canisters. What do I want to say by this? We are proposing, on top of this transformation, a pre-triage map to give it to the firemen. Something that you can use when you are attacking the fire and say, look, this house is in danger. My dear Laura visited Coiserola with me and we said, look, this can be defended. We had driving heads and all kind of problems, so we need to knock on those and say, look, this cannot be defensible if we have fire. Let's work together. We cannot pretend that we will protect everything. And these pre-triage maps should be there. This is the house I was mentioning in Coiserola. And here you could see the guy was here, covered by blankets, playing the guitar. And this is subject to disaster, of course. And then we have the social aspect. Also in Coiserola, how can I ask these people to make a transformation? I need to help. These people cannot transform anything because they live there with 4 hands, and there is a social network that we cannot avoid. So regarding, I will skip the safety concerns. This is urban area in Funchal. A only access street, and the fire would come up the back, and then it would be very difficult to escape. And then the origin is a forest origin, but the fire load wasn't a forest load, but it was different objects, as you could see. And then you have the houses complex, and then other examples are a snowball effect, domino effect. You have the hydrocarbons center, creating an emergency in itself. So we needed to adapt to a totally different scenario. It was a mixture requiring for different protocols, skills, and equipment. We have also examples in France. And I like to finish on a note which is about LPG deposits. I asked Repsol and other companies. There are no laws, specific laws, to protect these LPG tanks, which we are speaking about, especially hedges. The limit, according to the Petroleum Industry Association, the limit of mechanical resistance is 22 kilowatts by square meter. So look at the picture and tell me if we have 22 meters here. Our legislation, if in case of crown fire, with this separation, would mean 40 kilowatts. So our legislation does not take into account the LPG tanks. However, in France, they do have this protection. They've studied this and they realized that within 50 meters distance, there is a 20 kilowatts generation. But for us, this is totally opposite. This is uncharted territory. We could have bleve risk here. I've seen these are pictures of the Benitache fire. Canisters do explode. I think they didn't, but these canisters do explode. We saw this in France, Portugal. Exploded canister because they had a constant heat source, and I will stop here. They have a constant heat source, and I insist the other load is bringing the fire, and then it finally explodes. Another aspect is critical infrastructures such as fire centers, electricity, communication, depuration and treatment centers, And to finish, I would like to give you some specific messages. We have the possibility to transform the territory. We see once and again the same in many fires. We see the same lessons, same approaches, and technically it is possible. We don't have a legislation, specific legislation for this. There is nothing indicating the way forward. At WeWatch, we are doing something we shouldn't do. Meeting people, cutting things, but I cannot demand an owner to do something. But if there is an issue for concern, is the safety of our workers. And I think we are in uncharted territory. You're doing a great job. We don't make the headlines with 7 casualties, for example, because doing a great job, but this is not the way forward. So I think altogether we should highlight these aspects and anything you could tell us, and I will try to transform the landscape so then you can have safety and security in your intervention. And now I am open throughout this day. I am open to any question or idea that you would like to share with me. Thank you very much.